Behind the scenes of global trade, a silent crisis has begun to take shape over the past few months between the United States and China. What initially appeared to be confined to diplomatic statements and technological disputes has now escalated into a strike against one of the most unexpected and most vulnerable sectors of the American economy, agriculture. Welcome to Tellnomics, where we do not react to headlines, we anticipate consequences with clarity and precision. When current U.S. President Donald Trump publicly declared his intention to impose tariffs of up to 500% on Chinese imports. The signal was unmistakable. The objective was to project strength, pressure Beijing, and reinforce his electoral narrative that America comes first. But what was not anticipated is that the first casualty would be the rural economic heart of the United States itself, the very farmers who helped elect him. China's response was immediate and surgical. In September of 2025, for the first time in 7 years, Beijing completely halted purchases of American soybeans. Not a single ton, a total cutoff. The decision hit directly at the agricultural states of the Midwest, where thousands of farmers had harvested record crops under the assumption that China would remain their primary buyer. The impact was direct, silent, and devastating. Silos full, products sitting idle, no buyer in sight. And for the first time, American farmers began to realize that this was not merely a war against Beijing. It was a threat to the survival of their own farms. What Trump may not have foreseen is that this would not simply be an economic confrontation, but a conflict with the potential to implode his own electoral base. The question now is, how far can this rupture escalate? With China's total suspension of American soybean purchases, the shockwaves began spreading rapidly across the interior of the United States. In a bitter twist of irony, the very farmers who once celebrated Donald Trump's campaign promises now find themselves as collateral damage in his strategic offensive against Beijing. More than 76% of rural producers now say that they, not China, will be the ones most harmed by this tariff war. The rupture has not only eroded revenue, it has shattered the sense of trust and predictability in a sector that depends on long-term contracts and international stability to survive. And the economic hit did not stop at lost demand. A second blow followed immediately. Production costs surged. Fertilizers, machinery, fuel. Everything became more expensive, squeezing margins that were already razor thin. In southern Minnesota, the same scene repeats itself. Full silos, frozen exports, rural banks beginning to deny credit, and farmers asking a critical question: who will buy from us now? The U.S. Government floated the idea of an emergency relief package between $10 and $15 billion, but many analysts describe it as little more than a temporary bandage, not a structural solution. Meanwhile, Brazil and Argentina are moving rapidly to occupy the market space left behind by the United States. China did not retreat, that simply changed suppliers. And for American farmers, this shift may not be temporary, but irreversible. How can the United States win a trade war if every strategic move strengthens its competitors while weakening its own internal allies? If you want to understand what is truly happening behind the headlines, without propaganda, without superficiality, now subscribe now to Tellnomics and enable notifications. Here, we don't just react to the news, we anticipate consequences. Like this video, because what comes next may redefine the US. Elections and redirect trillions of dollars across global trade. The White House strategy appeared, on paper, straightforward. Apply record-breaking tariffs to pressure China into negotiating on terms favorable to the United States. But what happened was the exact opposite. China did not respond with direct aggression. It responded with absence. Rather than retaliate sector by sector, it simply stopped buying. It did not escalate tariffs. It targeted the electoral heart of Donald Trump. And it didn't merely pause purchases, it rerouted them. Brazil and Argentina, with infrastructure already partially prepared, moved with astonishing speed. Soybeans, corn, protein exports. China has now sent a message to the world. It can operate without the United States, and it is willing to rewire entire global supply chains to prove it. And while this happens, the United States is forced into a contradictory position, discussing multi-billion-dollar subsidies, compensations, and tax relief to support farmers who were supposed to be the primary beneficiaries of America First. At this stage, the trade war stops being merely an economic instrument and becomes a political dilemma. Because if the path forward is tariffs followed by government bailouts, a fundamental question emerges. Why start a war just to pay the bill with taxpayer money afterward? And this is where the situation turns dangerous. When an economic crisis evolves into a real political risk. In the rural states of America's interior, the mood is no longer one of concern. It is one of growing exhaustion. Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska, and South Dakota are entering a critical tipping point. Internal reports from the National Farmers Union confirmed that the bankruptcy rate among small family farms has reached its highest level since 2010. On average, a typical American farmer now carries over $250,000 in debt, and local banks have begun to deny seasonal refinancing, something that historically was never questioned. The feeling on the ground is one of imminent collapse, not because of crop failure, but because there is no buyer. American news outlets now show farmers surrounded by full barns and nowhere to sell. Politico recently warned that this may be the beginning of a social rupture, one that does not begin on Wall Street, but in the forgotten interior that has long formed Trump's political backbone. On national television, more and more families are seen selling tractors, land, and even homes to cover immediate losses. And on the other side of the world, Beijing is escalating its narrative. In the middle of this trade war, Chinese state media is now broadcasting footage of American rural distress as evidence that the United States is inflicting harm on itself, a calculated information strike designed to erode confidence during an election year. But the real breaking point has not even begun. What happens if this silent economic crisis transforms into an irreversible political one? At this stage, the trade war is no longer just a dispute over tariffs and exports. It has entered the battlefield of global perception, which may prove even more dangerous. China understood that it does not need to defeat the United States numerically. It only needs to show the world that the United States is defeating itself. While CNN airs reports of American farmers in tears, saying they voted for Trump and are now left with barns full of grain that no one wants, Chinese state media rebroadcast those images in prime time. Empty fields, indebted farms, the visual representation of a broken promise. At the same time, a far more consequential strategic move is underway. China is not merely replacing the United States, it is replacing it with the intention of never returning. Agricultural firms in South America, particularly in Brazil and Argentina, have seen their stock prices surge on the Shanghai and Shenzhen stock exchanges. Beijing is not just adjusting its imports, it is rebuilding supply chains with new partners it views as more reliable in the long term. Meanwhile, in Washington, internal discomfort is growing. How do you explain to the American public that America First now means using taxpayer money to compensate farmers because America's largest buyer was pushed away? And what if this is not a temporary disruption, but the beginning of a permanent global realignment where the United States loses the privileged position it has held for decades? What makes this situation even more serious is not just the immediate loss of revenue, but the very real possibility that the loss may be permanent. China has now made it clear that it does not intend to depend on the United States again for strategic agricultural supplies. Brazil and Argentina are rapidly expanding port infrastructure with Chinese financing. New long-term contracts are being structured without reversal clauses. And according to international trade analysts, recent negotiations are no longer just about volume, but about deep agricultural cooperation, including technology transfer, integrated logistics, and even direct investments in farmland. If this becomes permanent, the United States will not simply lose sales, it will lose structural relevance in a sector it has always used as a geopolitical instrument, and the consequences go far beyond economics. This directly undermines the narrative that has sustained Trump's electoral base, the image of a protector of rural America against global elites. The risk now is that a farming crisis could evolve into the collapse of one of the core promises of his political platform, the economic security of America's rural heartland. But while China has already made its move, Trump may still have one last card to play. The question is, will that final move be enough? Or will it come too late to stop an economic crisis from becoming a political rupture? The United States has reached a moment where every decision made from this point forward may determine not only its global positioning, but the public's faith in its own leadership. Three possible paths are now on the table. The first would be an emergency negotiation with China, involving discrete concessions and a reduction of tariffs for the immediate resumption of agricultural purchases. The second would be a race to redirect exports to new markets, requiring trade agreements and infrastructure that can be built overnight. The third, and most dangerous, would be to turn American agriculture into a sector permanently sustained by government money, a path that history has repeatedly shown rarely ends well. Whichever route is taken, the cost will be enormous, because this is no longer just an economic war, and it is a battle over the credibility of the White House in the eyes of its most loyal base. And beyond that, it is a test of whether the United States still has control over the consequences of the wars it chooses to initiate. The question now echoing inside and outside the US is inevitable. How can a nation that promised to put America first end up fighting to retain the trust of those who believed in that promise the most? Thank you for watching this analysis until the end. If you believe that discussions like this must be exposed with clarity and without filters, your participation is essential. Share your opinion in the comments. We want to know what you think about this unfolding reality. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to understand what's happening, and subscribe now to Tellnomics. Here, you don't just watch the news, you anticipate consequences.